How are you guys doing? My name is Kevin, and welcome to Sensitive Acceptance. It's not my first go-around on YouTube. I've been experimenting on this platform a few different times during my life. I used to have a gaming channel, and then I experimented with self-development for a while, and I had a travel channel as well. But I've always really aligned with YouTube, and I'm glad to be back on the platform. Definitely feels a little bit uncomfortable talking to a camera again for first time in a little while, so bear with me. But this video is going to be about a highly sensitive man. I think this is something that is starting to gain some traction in terms of being talked about, along with the broader HSP or highly sensitive person trait. But it's something that I think is very important to be talked about, and is part of the reason why I actually started this channel. Part of me just really wanted to, I felt like it was the right time to have my voice be heard and kind of describe some of the things that I've experienced throughout my life as a highly sensitive man, which is in fact a biological trait, which we'll get into, a temperamental trait that you inherit when you're born. But yeah, I felt like it was important to talk about this, and we're going to get into a broad range of life areas throughout this video, where I'll touch on what it's been like in that life area as a highly sensitive man. Obviously, being a man and being highly sensitive, there can be a bit of a culture mismatch there. Men are not expected to be sensitive, whereas a woman who's highly sensitive may have an easier time functioning in society, because sensitivity tends to be more affiliated with being feminine. So let's get into this. So just a really quick on my backstory. So I've always had a difficulty with my strong thoughts and emotions. So when I was a young kid, I was diagnosed with OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. And this was something that was prevalent a lot. It was pretty bad in my earlier years. It was something that affected me a lot in school, and I'll probably make dedicated videos getting more into that, so I'm just going to stay surface level with that for the time being. But beyond that, as I grew up through school, I encountered a lot of bullying. I was a very emotionally reactive person. I was definitely someone who wore my emotions on my sleeves, sometimes to my detriment, because I think a lot of people took advantage of that. And, I did have some really good friends when I was younger, but I was always someone who had maybe only a few friends, not like a larger group. And that's completely fine. I'm not completely relevant to what I'm discussing right now, but this is just a side point. And, as I grew up and I was in high school and then eventually university, obviously I started partaking in a lot of the things that, social people do. And it's kind of something that, a lot of people get immersed in, whether they're extroverted or introverted at some point or another. One of those things being partying, playing sports with other guys on team sports. And when I was going through these high school and college years, I often felt a bit mismatched with the way society was functioning. Partaking in things like sports, like the fraternity that I ended up joining, and I'll touch on that as well. But it led me to end up feeling like I was quite different from other people, and I think some of the effects from the bullying that I encountered during my childhood inhibited some of my confidence and my self-esteem, and I had a bit of a hard time fitting in with the types of people that I was hanging out with. And it led me so far to believe that I had social anxiety, and I ended up actually going to a support group to get help with social anxiety. And that pushed me into a long string of, hardcore self-development, or at least for a certain amount of time. After a long period of time of trying to figure out what exactly was going on with myself and why I felt the way I felt, I came across a trait called high sensitivity, or sensory processing sensitivity, or the trait of being a highly sensitive person, which is something that was piloted by Elaine Aron, who is a clinical psychologist in the 1990s with her husband. And she's really the architect of all this research and the person who kind of started it all in terms of performing scientific research on this trait. And at first, it was often confused with introversion and shyness. A lot of people thought that high sensitivity may be the same or affiliated with introversion and shyness, but Elaine Aron ended up figuring out that this was a trait that was completely standalone. It was something that was temperamental, so you inherit it. You inherit it when you're born, and in fact, 30% of highly sensitive people are actually extroverts and not introverts. So that's kind of, ever since I found that out, and that was about a year ago, I have dug really deep into high sensitivity, trying to learn how to accept this trait that I've found in myself, doing the self-test, discussing it with my family, and here I am. And now I've decided to start this YouTube channel. So I'm just going to spend some time talking about what the trait is for those of you who may not be familiar with it. So there's 4 main components of this trait, and they use the acronym DOES to describe what the components are. So the first one is depth of processing, which means that highly sensitive people, they process things incredibly deeply, obviously, but they spend a lot of time thinking about things at all times when they're taking in sensory information. So let's say something dramatic happened during an HSP's day. Like, let's say they witnessed someone robbing a store. Well, what will happen to the HSP is they may spend a lot of time after the event thinking about what happened, why it happened, the people involved, how they may feel about it. And they think about it way more than the average person would. And that's really an example of depth of processing. And it also results in taking a long time to make decisions, and also, pausing and reflecting a lot. So let's say they're about to send an important text message. They may really spend a long time crafting that text message, making sure that it is perfect and it's something that they'll actually want to send. Now, O stands for overstimulation. So HSPs are particularly sensitive to all kinds of sensory stimuli in the environment, whether that's things they see, things they hear, things they smell, things they taste. They respond more sensitively to those things, and they notice them more. So as a result of that, the world, of course, is filled with sensory stimuli. Whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the school, we live in such a loud world where there's just so much going on. So it's very common for an HSP to feel overstimulated by that. Their nervous system takes in so much information, or so much sensory information, that it completely drains them, and it overwhelms them to the point where eventually they just need to take some time to recharge. Now, E stands for emotional responsiveness or empathy, and this is where emotions come into play for an HSP, and it can be both on the negative and positive end of the spectrum. So let's say an HSP listens to their favorite song. They may feel way more emotionally invigorated by that song than your average non-highly sensitive person. And then when it comes to negative things, like let's say their friend yelled at them for a mistake that they did, an HSP may spend tons of time ruminating and feeling sensitive, so to speak, in the societal sense of the term, and being really affected by that criticism and really overanalyzing after it's happened. So the S stands for sensitivity to subtleties in the environment. So this is, of course, goes back to the 5 senses aspect, where HSPs feel they tend to notice things related to the 5 senses very easily, and maybe more easily than other people, and it can bother them more. So let's say there's a really loud construction going on next door to where they're working. The person beside them who's non-HSP, they may not be affected by that. They may be able to continue trekking on, continue working. But for an HSP, they may be completely bothered by that, and they need to move to another space. So now that we got that out of the way, I just want to touch on some of the common assets that HSPs have and weaknesses, because the term sensitivity, I think in society, has a lot of stigma attached to it, and a lot of people just associate, as I had previously mentioned, they associate the word sensitive to the inability to handle criticism, or just taking everything personally all the time. But while HSPs can be prone to this, it's really one small aspect of being an HSP. And being an HSP is something that was evolved through natural selection over the years, and is actually a trait that can help humans survive and help humans in a lot of ways. So some of the strengths for HSPs is they're very empathetic. They're very good at intuiting and reading people, understanding what could be going on in their life, how they could potentially help them out. And this can make HSPs really good therapists or counselors. Another thing is HSPs tend to be very conscientious. So they have a need for things to be done really well, which can help them out a lot when they're going through school and they have to get good grades. I know I found it relatively easy to, I guess, get good grades. I'm not bragging, I swear. And, that can also be an asset in the workplace as well, because sometimes, you want to do the job really, really well. And, you can be very detail oriented and the downside is HSPs can take this too far and be a bit perfectionistic, but they do have very high attention to detail and do things really properly in that sense. Now, third thing is HSPs tend to be very deep and spiritual people, very attached to meanings in life and in the bigger picture. And that can be, that can sometimes take away from the tangible aspects of the world and have them kind of be in their heads. But this can also lead them to come up with a lot of the new innovative ideas that can really help a lot of parts of society, a lot of the different problems in society. HSPs really have a knack for, interpreting things really deeply and going deep on a particular subject so that they can find the answer and solve a problem. So that's what I found, at least. In terms of the weaknesses for HSPs, we touched on some of them. They can be sensitive to criticism to the point where even small things can get them affected by that. And building upon that point, HSPs who grew up with a difficult childhood, maybe they faced traumatic experiences, they can actually be affected by that more than other people, and it can leave an imprint on them that really affects them down the road, and they can really be negatively affected emotionally by that. They also may find that they have a hard time fitting in because the world tends to be very fast-paced, very go, very competitive, and a lot of these things are counteractive to how an HSP functions, where HSPs are more, they take their time doing things, they're more about cooperation than competition a lot of the time. And, they're not always about just producing numbers or being productive. They're about actually, being very attentive, really reading people, making sure everyone is doing the job that's right for them, really having that humanistic focus to everything that they do. And of course, another glaring weakness is the overstimulation aspect. And you'll notice the theme here. A lot of this ties into the way the world's been designed. When you're going about your daily life, let's say you're going to work, you're going out with friends, a lot of these types of activities can be very mentally and physically draining. So an HSP is going to want to really take a lot of time to recharge, make sure they're in a good peak mental and physical state to be able to do a lot of these things. And because of overstimulation, a lot of the sensory stimuli in these environments can really drain them to a large extent. And that's why being able to take time to recharge is very important. So now on to what this channel is about, just a bit on this. So, with this channel, I want it to be about, reshaping the way society views emotions. And I think that, emotions can be a force for good. I think with what's going on in the world and how much difficulty there is out there right now, I think it's important now more than ever for humans to really come together, and we need these sensitive, empathic, humanistic people to come in and really show us, how we can connect as human beings and how we can really, make this world something that it is more directed towards people who may not be noticed that often, or who may be struggling to fit in, or people who may be struggling with things, and we may need to be drawing our attention to those problems and not be so narrow-minded and only focused on one thing like efficiency and productivity. These are very important things. And I'm just gonna read a little bit about the types of ideas I had for this channel when I was brainstorming it, because I have a bit of a vision on how I want the channel to be. And so one thing I wrote here is that I want this channel to be a place for people who do not fit into the societal majority. So as I touched on before, HSPs, we are in the minority. I didn't mention this before, but only 15 to 20% of the population are HSPs. And, a lot of them tend to be introverts as well. 70% are introverts, 30% are extroverts on average. So we tend to be a minority in society. We are intuitive feelers, and we want a place to be understood and expressed to. So yeah, a lot of us are, I'll talk about personality on this channel as well, but a lot of us are NF types. So we're intuitive feelers, and the majority of the society, actually, so this is tying into Myers-Briggs, but the majority of society types as sensors or sensing types. So they're more about the tangible aspects of the world and not so much about abstract concepts, so to speak. And there's about a split between thinking and feeling, but I know that out in society, feelings tend to be minimized a lot of the time. Emotions tend to be seen as something we need to get rid of, something we need to conquer and not really deal with. And this is something that ties into men a lot, which we'll get into. For men who don't fit into the boat of traditional masculinity and want to find their confidence and strength by being themselves. So, the idea here is that there's room for other versions of masculinity. We don't need to fit masculinity into one narrow box, or the traditional type that tends to propagate a lot of the world, particularly in Western society, where men are expected to be very tough, unemotional, stoic, constantly leading, unfazed by anything, dominant. These types of things, I think these are very rigid. And the idea is that if you are a man who possesses a lot of these things, that's completely fine. The idea is we want to create space for other traits that may be more traditionally associated with femininity, like empathy and nurture and being very caring and those types of things. This channel should be for those challenged by strong thoughts and feelings that inhibit their mental health, so they can find understanding, empathy, and support. So, I know there's lots of people out there who, have a hard time existing in this world because they all have such intense thoughts and feelings, and a lot of those people are HSPs, but they can also fall into that broader boat of people who suffer from anxiety, depression, OCD, things that, different mental illnesses. And, we're still in an age right now where mental health is only starting to become destigmatized and is only starting to come up into the public arena. So I think these people could use a place where they feel understood, where we get stories out in the open. And that's why, even though this can be difficult for myself, I'm putting myself out there right now and discussing what, my life has been like. And lastly, for those who are strongly affected by emotions, to learn how to handle them and express them healthily. So, of course, with emotions, which we've touched on, there can be positive and negative aspects. The common view out there may be that all emotions are bad, and we just want to push them aside and, just focus on our goals and focus on what needs to be done in the real world. But the truth is that we want to listen to our emotions and pay attention to both negative and positive emotions. And there's a right way to deal with emotions. If we are experiencing negative emotions, let's say, it doesn't mean we're just going to act out on impulse and start getting super angry or super, flustered in front of everyone. But there are proper ways to deal with those emotions. First, by, actually recognizing them, acknowledging them, sitting with those emotions, and then waiting for your brain to get more of a logical state, and then learning how to cope with those emotions in a way that, you're not repressing them, but you're also handling them in a healthy way where they're getting the attention they need, but they're not hindering you from living your daily life. So those are just a few of the things that I had in mind when I created this channel, and things that I kind of want this channel to stand for. And maybe the view will change to some extent, but at least right now, this is kind of how it is for myself. So now we're going to get more into talking about highly sensitive men and kind of, in the 21st century, what's the state of masculinity? I'm not going to go too deep into that because I think it's something we can touch on in a future video, but obviously one of the major movements in today's society is feminism. And, that's about women finding a place where, they can more openly be themselves and, do a lot of the things that they want to do in terms of pursuing their goals. So, with that, I think, toxic masculinity has been something that has been affiliated with that movement. And that's kind of shed a light on some of the more negative traits that masculinity can come with sometimes, and how restrictive it can be sometimes in terms of, almost having to fit some kind of bro code or man code where we have to, talk about this, or else you're this, or else you're not a real man or something like that. And, there are toxic aspects at play here. But, I really think that, high sensitivity, especially in men, is something that is actually really in line with feminism. I think that, for it's really what feminism is doing, but on the male side. So it's creating more space for men to be not necessarily these traditional traits, but also, other things that society can really use. Being very loving, nurturing, empathetic, displaying a lot of those feminine traits as we discussed earlier. And so another thing I've noticed that's actually really interesting is, so researchers have found that the HSP trait is about split 50-50 between men and women. About half of HSPs are men and half are women. But if you go into these online forums where the HSP trait is being discussed, or if you go into Facebook groups where it's being discussed, you're going to find that women vastly outnumber men in those groups. Now, at face value, there's nothing wrong with that. But, there's a lot of men. That also means that there's a lot of highly sensitive men out there who are not acknowledging their sensitivity, or maybe ignoring it. Or, there's this sense that, as a man, you don't want to be seen as highly sensitive because, that would mean I'm very weak and I'm, not a real man. So this is something that I think is also going to be a big part of what this channel is about, explaining and creating that space for, men who are highly sensitive to realize, okay, maybe I'm highly sensitive. I've taken the test, I fit the criteria. Now, how can I be comfortable in that? How can I, I don't necessarily need to tell people I'm highly sensitive, but how can I exhibit those traits in a way where I'm accepting of them and comfortable showing them to, let's say, my guy friends and all the other people in my life. So, I think that's very important for men to have, not feel so stigmatized, to be able to admit that they're highly sensitive and, not beat themselves up for being highly sensitive. So now I'm going to get into some of my experiences growing up as a highly sensitive man, and how it's kind of affected me both in my youth and in present day. So during childhood, when I was in elementary school growing up, I mentioned that I encountered some bullying. And, this is one aspect of being an HSP where, because HSPs are different from the majority, and, when you're growing up in school, there's always that pressure to try and conform, and you don't want to be, extradited socially or pushed away. You want to fit in, right? So, as I mentioned, as a kid, I was very emotionally reactive. And that's one thing that I do associate with being an HSP, especially as a young HSP, where we're not really grounded in our emotions and we can kind of let them get the best of us. And because I kind of, if someone tried to pick on me, I reacted a lot, and I got very angry in return, or got very upset, crying a lot. Things like that can sometimes put a target on your back, and can lead people to want to or continue taking advantage of you, or seeing you as different, seeing you as weak, seeing you as, other or separate from the majority. And another thing is that HSPs are not very confrontational people. Like, we would prefer to just, be harmonious, not create conflict. We don't like conflict at all. And so I think a lot of the majority, as when you're an HSP growing up, they know that you won't fight back. They know that they can almost take advantage of you and you're not going to do anything about it. So it makes you an easy target. So, this is something I kind of, I look back and I think like, man, like if only I would have reacted differently, if only I would have, not reacted so heavily, and, if only I kind of exerted myself or things like that, I wouldn't have to deal with all the negative side effects of having been bullied and, maybe feeling more fearful of rejection in present day life because of things I encountered or the reaction I got when I tried to, express myself in the ways that I expressed myself. So before I get into the next point, if you're an HSP man, comment down below and just let me know what your greatest challenge has been in life as an HSP man. Kudos to you for identifying that you are an HSP man and accepting that, so that's great. But if you are one, definitely let me know. And maybe you're a family member or the partner of an HSP man. And in that case, let me know down below what your HSP man, what their greatest challenge has been in life. I'd be curious to know, and I'll reply to your comments. So now getting into growing up. So, two things I'm going to touch on is sports and the fraternity that I was in. So when it comes to sports, I'm actually an HSP that enjoys sports. So, in the book, The Strong Sensitive Boy by Ted Zeff, he mentions that a lot of HSP men tend to be interested in things more related to the arts, in like musical theater, dance, singing, music. But for myself, I actually really liked sports. And, my dad really likes sports too. And I think he kind of introduced it to me in a very manageable way, one where it was actually a pretty healthy relationship with sports where, even though sports are competitive, I never felt like I was over pressured to perform. A lot of HSPs can have a hard time with feeling pressure in being in the moment and not being able to perform in that moment. But, I even was like a pitcher for a little bit while playing baseball, and that's a moment where the spotlight's completely on you and everyone's looking at you as you're getting ready to throw the ball. So, I actually was able to get into a place where I could manage that very, very well. And, the other aspect of sports is, being on a team with a bunch of guys, what is that like? And I never really had too big of an issue outside of school when it came to sports. When I was younger and I played hockey, I had a couple really close friends from school on my hockey teams, and that made it easy to socialize because I just preferred being in just socializing with one or two people, and that was what was comfortable for me. But then later, once it got to the point where they weren't on my hockey team anymore, I would go into a dressing room full of a bunch of guys, and I would feel very out of place. I just wouldn't talk much. I felt, like I was maybe a bit different. I couldn't joke and be very boisterous in the ways that they were. And, I did get some comments about, oh, Kevin, you're so quiet. Like, are you, oh, he talked, like things like that. And I absolutely hate those comments. They're absolutely terrible. But those are just some examples. So sports was kind of a balance of some positive aspects and negative aspects for me. Now, in terms of fraternity life, so in college or university, I had a couple friends from my program who ended up joining a fraternity and pledging for a fraternity. So, I did some partying back then, like a lot of university students do. And I kind of, went to the fraternity house one time, and they ended up picking me to be a pledge and to actually join the fraternity. So, at the beginning, it was kind of cool. It was I felt special because I was this person who's been selected to do this. And, I felt kind of validated by all these guys kind of accepting me and, accepting me as like a real cool man, so to speak, or popular man. But, as time went on, I kind of found myself really out of place in terms of some of the things that were being discussed in the house, especially as it related to different, escapades that these men had with women that they dated. And, I've never been someone who has been very quick or wanted to rush into one night stands or anything like that. That just hasn't been who I am. So I felt very, I couldn't really partake in those kinds of conversations. And I'm not very combative or, again, boisterous and, shooting jokes and shooting the shit all the time with guys in the room. That's not really my style. A lot of the guys would joke around with each other. And, when you're in a fraternity environment, you're often in a large room full of a bunch of guys. And that can be a very overstimulating atmosphere for someone who's highly sensitive. And, it can kind of be hard to almost, make sense of where you are and know kind of what you want to do, because you're so distracted by all the different conversations, all the noise. And that was often the case when we had parties, which I would sometimes numb that with alcohol, because I'm at a party, obviously. But yeah, I think that was a major aspect of being in the fraternity. And I remember some parties where I would almost just drift from one group to another group, and I would end up walking up and down the stairs and all around the party and not really, finding a place or people to talk to, because it was just such an overwhelming environment. And then we also had weekly meetings, and I remember we would all sit together in a room to discuss different fraternity related duties and issues. I had a hard time with that because it was late in the evening, and this was a case where I was very overstimulated and tired after a long day, and a bunch of loud guys come in, and I'm expected to socialize and partake in this meeting with them. So if any of the guys in that house end up watching this video at some point, I have nothing personally against any of you. I actually got to know a lot of the guys, and they're good guys. Yeah, so I just didn't really feel comfortable with being in that environment because of all the mainly the types of things that came up in conversations, and the typical way that men kind of or certain types of men, I guess, or the typical ways that men joke around with each other, really like shooting back and forth at each other. I do that with people I'm typically very close to, but with a room full of guys, I just can't do it. So next we're going to talk a bit about dating. So I think with dating, it's something that's been very challenging for me because I just tend to get extremely nervous when I'm dating. So it's not necessarily like I, can't actually go through with it, and I can't, actually come across as genuine or come across as interesting or anything like that. It's more just that I go in very tense and very nervous and very uptight, and sometimes I think the girls that I date can feel that. And, I think with the nerves, that's definitely an aspect of being an HSP, because your emotions can be much more intense. So I think, obviously being nervous, that's an emotion. And so I felt that really, really strongly. So, to actually prepare to go out on this date where this person could, it's also a pressure situation to some extent, because the person is judging or evaluating you to some extent, right? So HSPs tend not to like high pressure situations or anything where they have to perform. So it can sometimes feel that way, even though that's maybe not the right mindset to have going into a date. So, I've had to do things before a date to actually prepare for it. Like I'll do like meditation, or I'll do different body exercises to kind of release a lot of the tension that's built up. Another thing is, a lot of dates tend to be, or a lot of, if you look up, let's say if you Google first date ideas or something like that, you'll find a lot of the things people typically do on first dates or any dates are extroverted, like very in the action, in very loud environments. So let's say going out to a bar, or going out to, let's say, a amusement park, or going to an indoor arcade. And I've done some of these things, and it definitely can get draining. So, that's not really an issue. I mean, So it's not, well, that can be a challenge. You know, you can be adaptable, and, you know, you can find different activities that are more not in a loud environment, whether it's outside, you know, not too many people around, those kind of situations. So in that sense, it's been manageable. But another thing that I'm going to touch on in another video, and, you know, as HSPs, we're very self-critical, and we can fall into very depressive thought patterns at times. And so, you know, throughout my life, I've found myself falling into these kind of traps that I'm going to touch on. So, you know, with the rise of the internet, there's a lot of online businesses out there. And, you know, the three biggest niches out there that people do online businesses in are health, making money, and dating. So dating is one of them. And specifically on YouTube and other places on the internet, you're going to find a lot of guys out there who are preying on guys who feel that they're not a real man. They don't have the traits that it takes to be a dominant, masculine, alpha type man. And, you know, some of this advice is good advice. It depends. It really depends on, you know, the messaging that comes across, and how you, I guess, utilize that advice, and what kind of end goal is with that advice. But I've personally found that a lot of the messaging, especially as someone who takes things personally sometimes and can be sensitive to that, I found that a lot of the messaging tends to be quite discouraging and actually quite toxic. So a lot of these guys like to talk about, or a lot of these dating coaches or people, influencers in this area, they like to talk about, let's say, the nice guy, right? And so, you know, if you're looking at this realistically, right? A nice guy, you know, there's the type of guy who will, let's say, be manipulative, and they'll do nice things for women, let's say, in order to get something in return. And in my eyes, that's completely different than what I see as a nice guy and what highly sensitive men, or a lot of them, tend to possess. So, you know, highly sensitive men, a lot of them exhibit these types of nice guy traits, but because they're actually genuinely, it's coming from the heart, and they're actually trying to be, do acts of service, or they actually care, and, you know, care for the person when they're doing that, and they're actually trying to show specific traits like empathy, because they genuinely, it's part of who they are. It's ingrained in their personality. But to a lot of these influencers and coaches out there, they conflate these two things and make them the same thing, when in actuality they're two different things. And this is something I'll touch on in a future video. But the last thing is, you know, tying into the whole pressure to perform thing. You know, I've definitely felt, you know, that pressure to, you know, be a leader, you know, to be able to make sure I have enough, let's say, money in the bank to be able to provide, or, you know, be strong enough to be able to protect the woman. And sensitivity can be a source of strength, right? So when I say being strong, you know, I'm talking more about in the traditional sense, right? How society tends to sometimes view strength or strong men. So again, a lot of these are things that aren't actually true in actuality, but because of the culture and the way society tends to view things, it can be easy to fall into these really negative traps mentally, and it's definitely something I've struggled with and I've had to work at. So now we'll move on to career. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you give it a like, and I'd really appreciate it. And if you want to see me dive into some of these topics a bit more in future videos. So we're going to get into career now, and this is a newer area of being an HSP that I've had to learn and deal with. And, you know, a lot of office environments these days, they push heavy on the open concept, right? So, you know, there could be more human interaction than there typically would be in prior years when you go into work. So 30% of HSPs are extroverts, but they can still be affected by these things as well, because HSPs are all the same in the sense that they're all easily overstimulated and affected by sensory stimuli in their environment. So whether it's loud work colleagues, or, you know, bright lights, or, the air temperature in the office, that can also be a source of sensitivity. So these are things that affect both extroverted and introverted HSPs. So the open concept office can be a challenge. You can often leave the day feeling more tired than you otherwise would have been, and it can sometimes be harder to focus on your work if noise and things like that bother you. Smells in the office from people eating food, let's say, it can be somewhat challenging. Now, the other thing tying into being a highly sensitive man in career, I think traditionally as a man, back in the day, a man was someone who was provided for the family. They were like the breadwinner. And there's still pressure, I think, to feel like I can be a provider, to be someone who can make enough money, actually make a lot of money, and be able to support a family. And these are in principle important things, but not to the point of feeling incredible amounts of pressure and not feeling worthy enough if you're only considering certain careers. Like, let's say you went into careers that traditionally, a lot of women go into, like psychology, or let's say psychology. So, it can be easy to feel like you're maybe not strong enough, not capable enough, not enough of a leader, not assertive enough to, let's say, go into more of a masculine driven career. Traditionally, of course, I'm not trying to stereotype, but a traditional masculine type career, like being an investment banker, being a business consultant, or being, let's say, an accountant, having to take on a stable traditional type career that a lot of men traditionally took in order to climb the corporate ladder and feel like you can provide and really have that rock of stability. When in actuality, I'm someone who, I'm really driven by finding meaning in my work and wanting to find my purpose in life and what's kind of right for me. So, I may not align with those types of careers. And, I did pursue engineering in school. One of the reasons why was because it is something that has a good foundation and can be stable. And, it does offer some flexibility to be able to pursue other things after engineering. And that's a valid reason for sure. But, when I was in engineering, there were a lot of guys and men in engineering. So, I think that plays into, I definitely think that plays into that stereotype or that perception that men have to do those types of things. All right, so I actually had to stop filming earlier because I had to go. So you'll probably notice that I'm now in a different room and wearing something else. So let's continue here though. So we were talking about career, and one more point I wanted to make about that is, there's the aspect of blending in as an introvert, and it is important to mention that 70% of HSPs are introverts. That being said, there are 30% of HSPs who are in fact extroverted. But the thing is, even the extroverted HSPs can still get overstimulated by all the sensory noise in their environment, whether that's loud noise, smells, all those things. So much like the introvert, they do need that time to recharge and recoup. But if they're in a loud office environment where they have to be very productive, but there's all this sensory noise, it can be very challenging. So, this is something introverts do struggle with in general, in terms of open concept offices, things like that. So that's very much an issue for HSPs as well, and something that I've found to be somewhat concerning during my early career development. So the last portion of this video, I just wanted to talk about some advice I have moving forward. So, obviously a lot of this video I spent talking about a lot of ways in which being an HSP man has been challenging. But, I do believe, I do want to reiterate that there are a lot of strengths to being an HSP that I mentioned earlier in the video. And it's a completely neutral trait. It's not meant to be a trait that is bad or needs to be cured. In fact, it's not listed as one of the disorders that let's say a psychologist or any sort of therapist can cure, because it is not something that should be cured. There are a lot of benefits to being an HSP. So on a positive note, here's some advice moving forward, and kind of what I felt has been somewhat useful to me as I continue along this journey. of accepting myself as a highly sensitive man. There's a couple books I've read that I found to be really good, and I'll recommend them. One is The Strong Sensitive Boy by Ted Zeff. Unfortunately, Ted Zeff was one of the pioneers alongside with Elaine Aron. He's done a lot of research in the area of HSPs, especially as it relates to men. He's passed away, unfortunately, but he's left along a lot of great work. And this book was really good in helped me understand my childhood and kind of why I may have gotten bullied and the different dynamics I faced as I was interacting with other men throughout my development as a child. So I strongly recommend that book. There's a new book called The Highly Sensitive Man, released by Thomas Falkenstein, who is a psychotherapist in Europe. He's also been doing a lot of great work in this area. I think those are the two big ones that I would recommend specific to highly sensitive men. But of course, all of Elaine Aron's books are really good too. And I also recommend Tracy Cooper's books. Thrive, which is about HSP and career, and Thrill, which is about HSP and the high sensation seeker, which is actually another temperamental trait that I'll go into in a future video. So alongside these books, there's a couple other things that I think are really important to mention and actually gets mentioned a lot in these books. One is that self-care is extremely important as an HSP. I think Tracy Cooper in one of his books mentioned that, you know, self-care, it really is a necessity for an HSP. It's not just like something you should do or a luxury or, you know, I should meditate. Oh yeah, you know, I should go out for a bike ride and exercise more. No, like it's something you literally have to do. It's a need for an HSP in order to function at the same capacity that a lot of other people function out in the real world. We need to be giving ourselves that time to recharge. If we've just been through a stimulating social event, if we've just gone to, let's say, through a really stimulating job interview, we just went on a date and that was stressful and overwhelming. You know, these are important things that we need to do to help reset our body in a lot of ways, take that time to recuperate and take that time for ourselves to help ourselves recharge and be at our best. So that's one thing. Another thing is setting boundaries. You know, HSPs, we can tend to fall into that trap of, you know, somebody's getting walked on by other people because, you know, we are very empathetic, kind of people-focused, humanistic type of people, and that can cause us to sometimes overgive, overbear ourselves, neglecting our own needs sometimes. And I think, you know, people could sometimes get used to that and maybe think that we enjoy doing that all the time. And it is a gift of ours, but, you know, it's something that, you know, you have to fill up your own cup before you can fill up other people's cups. So it is important that we set boundaries and learn how to say no and be able to take care of our own needs before we can take care of others' needs, or else we're just not going to show up at our best. You know, we're not going to be able to go into social events or any sort of volunteer settings or any people helping settings feeling at our best. It's just not going to happen. The last thing is, you know, I think HSPs can really benefit from, you know, being a bit different from the rest of the world and just embracing that, you know, finding a mission. And that's what I'm trying to do with this channel. You know, I've realized that, you know, I am in fact pretty different from a lot of other people I've met, and we'll get more into personality in other videos. And, you know, I'm still trying to figure out my MBTI type, actually, my Myers-Briggs type. But I'm pretty sure I'm an idealist, like an NF type. So that causes me to be, you know, almost distant from, like, let's say the sensing types, the S types in the world, and a bit more abstract and wanting to always be perfect in terms of my ideas and having the perfect life that has a lot of meaning and purpose and really taking my life in a really visionary type direction where I'm following my dreams. And, you know, that's kind of what I'm trying to kind of kickstart some of that process by doing something that's uncomfortable for me, which is sharing a lot of this stuff on YouTube. So I think, you know, whatever your mission ends up being, you know, I think it's always good for HSPs to align with some kind of greater purpose. Spirituality is very beneficial for HSPs. That doesn't necessarily have to mean religion or anything like that, but I think just connecting with the universe, connecting with something bigger than yourself can be really good, I think. And it's something I'm continually building towards and working on. And yeah, So that's pretty much it. I know this has been a long video, but I hope there was useful information in this video. And I just want to leave you guys with a message that I think one thing I didn't even touch on this video is there are a lot of men out there who unfortunately end up becoming victims of suicide and even just suffer a lot throughout their life, and end up turning to alcohol and drugs and things like that, because they're so used to repressing their emotions. And, I think a lot of men struggle with how they can express their emotions, finding them, figuring out how they feel and how they can actually bring out their emotions in a way where people won't judge them for that. And, they can actually make a positive contribution to society with those emotions. And so repression of emotions, it just has to stop. There's positive ways to deal with emotions. We don't have to run away from them. We can face them. We can show them. But of course, from that point, we got to just deal with them in a healthy way. And by healthy way, I mean that, if we have strong thoughts and emotions, there is a lot of substance in that oftentimes. We think of these masterful, complex ideas that are often very fueled by things we've experienced in our lives and are very emotionally driven and invigorating. And so I think the world would really appreciate and benefit from if we put that into action, especially as it relates to showing empathy towards our fellow humans and, helping other people, and really bringing a more of a humanistic touch into the world, making it less about always getting things done and, being competitive and individualistic and productive, and more about, coming together, using our unique gifts, and really, just realizing that everyone has their unique gift to offer to the world, and we can all come together in that way. There's also a place for all of you who do feel strongly and think strongly. There's amazing musicians in the world. There's amazing artists. Creatives are important to this world too, right? We need all those forms of entertainment and forms of expression to really make life what it is. So we just want to create that space for those types of people to feel like they can coexist with everyone else, and to just have, the messages for everyone to just be able to be their authentic self without having to apologize for it or feel weird about it. So, as I said before, we ultimately want to change the way society as a whole views emotions. And so if you guys enjoyed this video, I definitely appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button below and hit that bell notification as well, so you get notified when I release new videos. Of course, leave a like if you enjoyed hearing my experiences and you want to hear more about different aspects of being a highly sensitive person, stuff about personality and Myers-Briggs, and also just about mental health in general, particularly as it relates to men, but also just mental health in general, because I've, faced things like OCD throughout my life, and I feel like I have some things to share in that area as well. So that's what's to come. So guys, until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Take care.